A man named Marcus looked out from his warm house window on a cold morning in January. He held a hot cup of coffee in his hand. His fingers were warm. His house was warm. Outside the window, the temperature was so cold that it would kill a human being in less than 1 hour if they stood there without protection. But Marcus did not think about this. He did not think about the cold at all. He did not think about the 3 white animals that stood in the far corner of his field, completely still, barely breathing, waiting to die. Instead, he turned away from the window and went back to his warm kitchen. He did not want to know what was happening outside. He did not want to see. This is how many terrible things happen in the world. Not because people are evil, but because people choose not to look. The story of the 3 white donkeys did not start in the winter when they were freezing. It started many months before, on a warm spring day when everything seemed possible and nobody could have imagined what would happen next. A man named Marcus was a person who did not like to make decisions. He was 42 years old. He had never been married. He had never had children. He had never owned a business or managed anything important. In fact, Marcus had spent most of his life trying to avoid any situation where he would have to be responsible for anything or anyone. But one day, his life changed completely. His uncle died and left him a piece of property in the mountains. This property was not in a city. It was not near any town. It was in the middle of nowhere, in a rural area where very few people lived and life was difficult for everyone who lived there. With the property came a house, a barn, fields, and several animals. Marcus had never expected to inherit anything. He had never asked for property or animals or responsibility. But now he owned all of it. When Marcus first saw the property, he felt confused and scared. He was not a farmer. He did not know anything about farming. He did not know how to care for animals. He did not know how much food they needed or what kind of shelter they required or what to do if they got sick. He stood in the field and looked at the animals with worry in his heart. There were a few chickens. There were 3 goats. And there were 3 white donkeys. These donkeys were smaller than horses. They had thick, white coats. They had dark eyes that looked kind and gentle. They had long ears that moved when they heard sounds. The donkeys did not know that Marcus owned them now. They did not know that their lives depended on him. They came over to him and ate some grass from his hands. They seemed happy to see him. Marcus felt something in his heart. He wanted to take care of them. He wanted to be a good person who looked after animals. But this feeling only lasted for a few minutes. Later that same day, Marcus sat in the house and thought about money. The property was expensive. He had to pay tax on the land every year. He had to fix the roof and repair the walls and pay for electricity. If he wanted to keep the animals, he would have to buy food for them. He would have to pay a veterinarian if they got sick. This would cost money. A lot of money. Marcus was not poor, but he was not rich either. He had enough money to live a comfortable life. He did not have enough money to spend thousands of dollars every year on animals that did not serve any purpose. The donkeys could not pull heavy things. The goats could give milk, but Marcus did not want to deal with milk. The chickens could give eggs, but Marcus did not like chickens. He spent the rest of the day thinking about what to do with the animals. He thought about selling them. He thought about giving them away. But both of these ideas required effort and decision-making, and Marcus did not want to do anything difficult. So he decided to do nothing at all. He would leave the animals on the property. In the warm months of spring and summer, there was plenty of grass. The animals could eat the grass. He did not need to buy special food. He did not need to do anything. The animals could take care of themselves. This decision made Marcus feel better. He told himself that animals were strong. He told himself that they had survived in nature for thousands of years without help from humans. He told himself that this was how the world worked. Some animals survived. Some animals did not. It was not his responsibility. It was just nature. With this idea in his mind, Marcus stopped thinking about the animals completely. He went back to his normal life. He spent his days reading books and watching television and drinking coffee. The animals became like furniture to him. They were there, but he did not really see them. He did not really think about them. Months passed. Spring became summer. The weather became warm and beautiful. The grass in the field grew tall and green. The animals ate the grass. They drank water from the small stream that ran through the property. Everything seemed fine. Marcus watched the animals sometimes from his window and felt satisfied that his decision had been correct. He did not need to worry about them. They were fine. They did not need him. But then the seasons started to change. In late summer, the days became shorter. The nights became longer. In autumn, the leaves turned red and gold and then fell to the ground. The air became cold. Marcus noticed that the animals were eating more grass, as if they knew that winter was coming and they needed to prepare. But Marcus did not understand what this meant. He did not understand that the animals were trying to get ready for the freezing months ahead. He did not understand that in just a few weeks, the temperature would drop so low that survival would become very difficult. He did not understand that an animal needs special shelter and special food to survive in harsh winter conditions. In fact, Marcus tried not to think about winter at all. He tried not to imagine what would happen when the snow came and the temperature dropped to levels that he could not even imagine. One cold morning in early November, Marcus woke up and looked out the window. He saw snow. Not a little bit of snow. A lot of snow. The field was covered with a thick white blanket. The grass was gone. The stream was frozen solid. The temperature outside was so cold that breathing hurt. Marcus felt a pain in his chest. He understood, finally, that he had made a terrible mistake. The animals could not eat grass that was covered with snow. They could not drink water that was frozen. They could not survive outside without shelter and warmth and food. They were going to starve and freeze. But instead of feeling sorry, instead of rushing out to try to help them, Marcus felt angry. He felt angry at the animals for being alive. He felt angry at his uncle for leaving him the property. He felt angry at the universe for putting him in this situation where he had to feel bad about something. And so he did the worst thing that a person can do. He decided not to look. He decided not to think about what was happening in his field. He went back to bed. He closed the curtains so that he could not see the snow. He told himself that he did not care what happened to the animals. This was nature. This was survival of the fittest. This was not his problem. Day after day, as the temperature dropped and the snow piled higher, Marcus refused to look outside. He did not go to the barn. He did not check on the animals. He did not bring them food or water. He simply pretended that they did not exist. In the far corner of the field, behind the barn where he could not see them, the 3 white donkeys stood motionless in the freezing snow. Their white coats became covered with ice. Their bodies became thinner and thinner. Their eyes became dull and empty. They were slowly dying, alone and forgotten, in a place where nobody cared. And nobody knew that this was happening. Nobody knew that 3 innocent animals were suffering terribly. The world went on. Other people lived their warm lives. And the 3 white donkeys stood in the snow, waiting to die. Sarah was not looking for trouble that cold January morning. She was simply doing her job. She worked as a veterinary assistant, which meant that she helped animals that were sick or injured. She did not have a big office or a fancy clinic. She traveled in an old truck from village to village, carrying medical supplies and knowledge, helping animals that lived in the mountains far away from big hospitals. Every winter, Sarah would drive the same route. She would visit the same villages. She would check on the same animals. She knew the mountains like she knew the lines on her own hands. She knew every fence, every barn, every property. She knew which farmers took good care of their animals and which ones did not. But on this particular morning, something was different. Something had changed. As Sarah drove her truck slowly up the mountain road, she felt a strange feeling in her stomach. It was the feeling that something was very wrong. The road that Sarah drove on passed many properties. Some had beautiful houses with smoke coming from the chimneys, signs of life and warmth inside. Some had properties that looked abandoned and sad. But there was one property that Sarah had never paid much attention to before. It had a locked gate. The house seemed empty. No one had lived there for months, maybe longer. Sarah had driven past this property many times, and she had never thought much about it. But this morning, something made her slow down. This morning, something made her look carefully at the empty field beyond the fence. At first, she saw nothing but white snow. At first, she thought the field was empty. But then her eyes caught something. 3 shapes. 3 forms that were so covered in snow and ice that they looked more like rocks than like living things. Sarah stopped her truck in the middle of the road. She turned off the engine. She stared at the field. Her heart began to beat faster. She understood immediately, with a certainty that came from years of working with animals, that those 3 shapes were donkeys. And she understood, with a deeper and more terrible certainty, that they were dying. Sarah got out of her truck. She was not dressed for standing in the freezing cold. She had a light jacket that was not warm enough. She had boots that were not insulated enough. But she did not care about her own comfort. She walked to the fence and looked more carefully. Yes, They were definitely donkeys. 3 of them. White donkeys. Standing completely motionless in the corner of a field that had no shelter, no food, nothing that an animal needed to survive. She could see their ribs from where she stood. She could see how thin they were. She could see how ice covered their bodies. She could see that they were barely alive. Sarah stood there in the cold and felt tears come into her eyes. She felt anger and sadness and fear all at the same time. She understood what had happened. She understood that someone owned these donkeys and had simply left them to die. She understood that this was happening right now, today, in the cold, while she was standing here and people were drinking warm coffee in warm houses. She understood that nobody knew about this. Nobody cared. Nobody was going to help these animals unless she did something. Sarah ran back to her truck. Her hands were shaking. She found her phone and called the police. She told them that there were 3 animals freezing in a field on the mountain road. She told them that they were going to die if someone did not help them immediately. The police officer who answered the phone was polite, but not very interested. He told her that he would send someone, but that there were more important emergencies that day. There had been an accident on the main road. There were reports of homes without heat where people were freezing. The animals would have to wait. Sarah wanted to scream. She wanted to tell him that the animals could not wait. She wanted to tell him that waiting meant death. But she knew that screaming would not help. So she hung up and called another number. She called the local animal protection office. The person who answered told her that they did not have the authority to enter private property without the owner's permission. Sarah would have to call the owner and ask permission. Sarah would have to solve this problem herself. Nobody was going to help her. Sarah looked at the phone number that she had found for the owner of the property. His name was Marcus. She called him. She told him about the donkeys. She told him that they were dying. She told him that he had a legal responsibility to care for animals that he owned. She told him that if he did not help them, she would call the police and report him for animal cruelty. Marcus listened to all of this, and then he said something that made Sarah's blood run cold. He said that the donkeys were not his responsibility. He said that if they died, that was nature. He said that Sarah should stop interfering in things that did not concern her. And then he hung up the phone. Sarah sat in her truck and felt despair. She felt like the world was broken. She felt like nobody cared about these animals. She felt like she was completely alone in this. But then something inside her changed. She decided that she would not accept this. She decided that she would not give up. She decided that if the official people would not help, then she would find someone who would. She called a man named Victor. She did not know him very well. She had met him once, years ago, during another animal rescue operation. But she remembered that he was a man who helped animals. She remembered that he was stubborn and determined. She remembered that he was the kind of person who would not accept that anything was impossible. Sarah told him about the 3 donkeys. She told him that they were freezing in a field. She told him that they would probably be dead in a few days if no one helped them. She told him that the authorities would not help. She told him that the owner did not care. She told him that these 3 animals needed someone to say that their lives mattered. There was silence on the phone for a long moment. Sarah was afraid that Victor would say no. She was afraid that he would tell her that it was not his problem. But then he said something very simple. He said, "Tell me exactly where they are. I will come." The next few hours were the longest hours of Sarah's life. She could not leave the area. She could not stop thinking about those 3 donkeys standing in the freezing cold. She could not stop imagining them getting weaker and weaker. She drove back to the property 3 times to look at them and make sure they were still alive. Each time she looked, she thought they seemed thinner, more desperate. She began to understand something that most people never understand. She began to understand what it felt like to carry the weight of knowing that something terrible was happening and being unable to stop it immediately. She understood the desperation of caring about something that the world did not care about. She understood what it meant to be the voice for something that could not speak for itself. When Victor finally called her and told her that he was on his way, Sarah felt like she could breathe again. But she also felt something else. She felt responsibility. She had called Victor. She had asked him to come. She had asked him to put himself through difficulty and cold and risk to save 3 animals that belonged to a man who did not care. Victor was already on his way. There was no turning back now. Sarah drove to meet him at the property. She brought blankets. She brought warm water. She brought medical supplies from her truck. She brought herself. She was ready to stand in the freezing cold for as long as it took. She was ready to fight to save these 3 lives. She did not know if they would succeed. She did not know if Victor would be able to get the gate opened. She did not know if the donkeys were still strong enough to be moved. But she knew one thing with absolute certainty. She knew that she had done the right thing. She knew that she had refused to look away. She knew that she had been the voice that these three animals needed when they had no voice of their own. Victor was not a young man anymore. His hands were old and worn from years of hard work. His back hurt when he bent down. His knees made sounds when he walked upstairs. He was the kind of man who looked at life and did not expect good things to happen to him. He had lived a difficult life. He had lost people he loved. He had failed at many things he had tried to do. But something about the story of the three white donkeys made him feel different. It made him feel like maybe he could do something good. Maybe he could save something. Maybe his life meant something. So on a freezing cold morning, Victor did something that nobody expected him to do. He got in his truck and he drove toward a property he had never seen before to rescue three animals he had never met, with no guarantee that they would survive and no payment for his work. The drive to Marcus's property took 2 hours. As Victor drove higher into the mountains, the snow became thicker. The roads became more difficult. Other drivers turned back and went home. But Victor kept driving. He had called Sarah the night before, and she had told him exactly where to go. She had told him that the three donkeys were probably still alive, but only barely. She had told him that if they were not rescued very soon, they would die. Victor believed her. He had seen animals that were close to death before. He knew what it looked like. So he drove faster, pushing his old truck to go as fast as it could go in the dangerous snow. Finally, after 2 hours that felt like 20 hours, Victor saw the fence. He saw the locked gate. He saw the empty white field beyond it. He parked his truck and got out. The cold hit him like a physical thing, like something solid that pushed against his body. He could barely breathe. The air was so cold that it hurt his lungs. He stood there for a moment and tried to understand how any living thing could survive in this cold. But he did not give up. He called his friend Leo on his phone. Leo worked at an animal sanctuary. Leo had medical knowledge. Leo knew how to help animals that were suffering. Victor told him to come right away with everything they might need. Then Victor went to the gate and tried to open it. It was locked. He called Marcus. Marcus answered the phone with anger in his voice. Victor was a stranger to him. Victor had no right to come to his property. Victor should go away. But Victor was a different kind of man. He was a man who would not accept no as an answer. He spoke quietly, but with absolute certainty. He told Marcus that the police would come. He told Marcus that the news would come. He told Marcus that everyone in the region would know that Marcus had let 3 animals freeze to death. He told Marcus that his life would become very difficult if he did not unlock the gate right now. Marcus understood that Victor was serious. 20 minutes later, Marcus drove to the gate and unlocked it. He did not say anything to Victor. He did not apologize. He just unlocked the gate and drove away, disappearing down the mountain road. Victor walked into the field. His boots crunched on the frozen ground. The snow was so deep that it covered his ankles. As he walked toward the corner of the field where Sarah had told him to look, Victor began to understand the terrible truth of the situation. There was nothing moving in this field. There were no sounds. There was no life. There was only silence and cold and white snow in every direction. Victor began to feel scared. Maybe the donkeys were already dead. Maybe he had come too late. Maybe all of this had been for nothing. But then, as he walked further, he saw them. 3 shapes. 3 white forms that were so covered in ice and snow that they looked more like statues than like animals. Victor stopped walking. He stood completely still. He felt tears come into his eyes, even though the cold made it painful to cry. These 3 donkeys were alive. He could see them breathing. He could see their eyes following him. But they were barely alive. They were so close to death that Victor could almost feel it. They could barely stand. Their legs shook with cold and weakness. Victor came closer slowly. He did not want to frighten them. He did not want to make them run. A donkey that is scared and weak might fall down and never get up again. So Victor moved like he was moving through water, slowly and carefully, speaking in a quiet, calm voice. He did not use words that made sense. He just made sounds that were soft and gentle. The first donkey, a female with a long white mane, did not move away from him. She did not have the energy to move. Victor reached out and touched her neck. Her coat was completely frozen. Ice covered every part of her. Victor took off his own jacket and put it around her shoulders. It was a small thing. It would not save her life, but it was something. It was the first act of kindness that this donkey had felt in many weeks. The donkey's eye moved and looked at Victor. Maybe she understood. Maybe she felt something inside her heart that said help is coming. Leo arrived with a trailer and blankets and medical supplies. There was another man with him, a neighbor named Dmitri who had strong muscles and patient hands. The four men stood in the frozen field and looked at the three donkeys. They all understood that this was going to be very difficult. The donkeys were weak, but they were still heavy. A donkey weighs hundreds of kilograms. These three donkeys did not want to move. They did not want to go anywhere. They wanted to stand in their corner of the field and wait for death, because death seemed easier than change. But Victor and Leo and Dmitri would not let them die. They worked for nearly an hour, using ropes and patience and kindness. They tried to lead the first donkey to the trailer. She took one step, then another. Her legs shook. Her body moved like it was made of broken glass. But she moved. Slowly, with terrible difficulty, the first donkey walked to the trailer and went inside. The second donkey was even more difficult. She did not want to move at all. Her legs had locked from the cold. The men had to almost carry her. They wrapped a rope under her body. They pulled gently. Dmitri had to push from behind, while Victor and Leo pulled from the front. The donkey made sounds of pain and fear. But eventually she moved. Step by step, meter by meter. Finally she reached the trailer and went inside. The third donkey, the smallest one, was the hardest. She was so weak that she could barely stand. The men were afraid that if they moved her, she would fall and they would not be able to get her up again. So they moved very slowly with this one. They stopped every few steps so she could rest. They talked to her and touched her to keep her calm. Victor looked into her eyes and made a promise. He promised that she would survive. He promised that someone cared about her. He promised that her life mattered. After nearly 30 minutes, the smallest donkey reached the trailer. All three animals were finally safe from the freezing field. Sarah sat in the back of the trailer with the three donkeys as Victor drove down the mountain. She checked their breathing. She made sure they did not fall down. She kept her hands on their sides to give them whatever warmth she could. She whispered to them and told them that they were safe now. She told them that people cared about them. She told them that they would survive this cold and this suffering. The drive to the sanctuary took 2 hours. 2 hours of careful driving on dangerous roads. 2 hours of Victor watching in his mirror to make sure the trailer was okay. 2 hours of the three donkeys standing together, finally together with someone who would not leave them alone, finally with people who wanted them to live. When they arrived at the sanctuary, the staff was ready. Warm stalls had been prepared. Blankets had been laid down. Heat lamps had been turned on. A veterinarian stood waiting. As the three donkeys were carefully led from the trailer into the warm barn, everyone understood that they had witnessed something important. They had witnessed 3 lives being saved. They had witnessed human beings choosing to suffer difficulty and cold themselves so that other creatures could live. They had witnessed what was possible when people refused to give up. When broken things learned to live again. The slow journey of 3 donkeys returning to hope. The first night at the sanctuary was not a night of celebration or happiness. It was a night of waiting and worrying and fear. The 3 donkeys were placed in separate warm stalls because the veterinarian was not sure if they would live through the night. The smallest one, the one that Victor had promised to save, stopped eating within an hour. Her breathing became very shallow. Her eyes closed. The sanctuary staff sat with her through the darkness, unsure if she would ever open her eyes again. A veterinarian named Dr. Petra stayed awake all night, checking her pulse, listening to her heartbeat, giving her medicine to help her fight the infection that was slowly killing her from the inside. By morning, when the sun started to come up, the smallest donkey opened her eyes. She was still alive. It was a small victory, but it was a real one. In the next stall, the second donkey had made it through the night as well. She was standing, which was something. Her legs were shaking. Her body was still very weak. But she was standing, and she was breathing, and she was alive. The strongest of the 3, the one with the long white mane, had survived the night with no problems. She had eaten some warm food. She had drunk water that had been heated so that it would not hurt her frozen throat. She was still in danger, but she was stable. Dr. Petra examined all 3 donkeys on that first morning. The examination took a long time. She looked at their eyes and their legs and their hooves. She felt their sides to see how thin they were. She listened to their hearts and their lungs with a medical instrument called a stethoscope. When she was finished, she sat down and told Victor and Sarah and Leo what she had found. The good news was that all 3 donkeys would probably survive. They were strong animals. They had extraordinary strength hidden inside their thin bodies. The bad news was much longer. All 3 of them had severe frostbite on their ears and hooves. This meant that the flesh was damaged by the cold. Some of this tissue would die and fall off. Their ears might not ever look normal again. Their hooves would need many months to regenerate and grow new, healthy material. All 3 had parasites. This meant that small creatures living inside their bodies were eating their insides, making them weaker. All 3 had infections from the cold and the poor conditions. They had pneumonia starting in their lungs. They had diseases in their digestive system. Each of these problems could kill an animal that was already weak and stressed. Together, they were very serious. But with treatment and care and warmth and time, the donkeys might recover. It was not guaranteed, but it was possible. For the next 2 weeks, the 3 donkeys lived in their warm stalls and received medicine and food and care that they had never known in their lives. Volunteers came at all hours of the day and night to check on them. The smallest donkey was given special attention because she was still the weakest. Dr. Petra came twice every day to examine her and give her injections that would help her fight the infections. The donkeys were fed special food that was soft and easy to digest. They were given water that was warm. They were given blankets to lie on. They were given heat lamps to keep them warm. But something unexpected happened during these 2 weeks. The donkeys did not get better in the way that everyone expected them to get better. Their bodies were healing. The infections were going away. The food was making them stronger. But their minds were still broken. They still did not trust people. They still flinched when anyone came near them. They still remembered the cold and the hunger and the loneliness. When a sanctuary worker came to check on them, they would back away. When someone tried to touch them, they would shake with fear. The smallest donkey would not eat if anyone was watching her. She had learned that being watched meant danger. She had learned that humans meant pain and suffering. Victor came to the sanctuary almost every single day. He brought fresh vegetables that he had bought with money he did not have. He brought special supplements that cost a lot of money. He brought time. This was the most important thing he brought. He would go into each stall, and he would sit down on the floor. He would not touch the donkeys. He would not try to make them do anything. He would just sit there and be present. He would talk to them in a quiet voice. He would tell them stories. He would tell them that they were safe. He would tell them that nobody would hurt them anymore. He would tell them that he understood that they were scared. He would tell them that their fear made sense because they had experienced terrible things. He would tell them that he was sorry about what had happened to them. He would tell them that he would never leave them alone again. He would sit for 1 hour, then 2 hours, then 3 hours. He would come back the next day and do the same thing. At first, the donkeys wanted nothing to do with him. The smallest one would hide in the corner of her stall. The second one would stand as far away from him as possible. But the strongest one, the one with the long white mane, started to watch him. She did not run away. She did not hide. She just watched him. One day, after Victor had been visiting for 10 days, something incredible happened. The donkey with the long white mane walked over to Victor and put her nose near his face. It was a small gesture. It was not a big thing, but it was the first time that any of the 3 donkeys had shown that they wanted contact with a human being. Victor sat completely still. He did not move. He did not reach out. He just let her smell his face and his hands. Then she did something that made Victor cry. She lowered her head and rested it on his shoulder. She was saying something without words. She was saying that she understood that he had saved her life. She was saying that she trusted him. She was saying that maybe, just maybe, humans were not all bad. Victor sat there with his head touching the donkey's head, and he cried like he had not cried in many years. Sarah, who was watching from outside the stall, also had tears in her eyes. This moment was not just important for the donkey. It was important for Victor. It was important for everyone who believed that life could be better, that suffering could be overcome, that trust could be rebuilt even after terrible betrayal. After this moment, things changed. The second donkey began to watch Victor the way that the first one did. She began to come closer. She began to eat while he was in the stall with her. This was a sign that she felt safe. This was a sign that she was starting to believe that the world was not completely dangerous. The smallest donkey took much longer. She was the most damaged. Her fear ran the deepest. But slowly, day by day, she also began to change. She began to eat. She began to stand closer to Victor. She began to look at him instead of looking away. By the end of the 4th week, All 3 donkeys would come to Victor when he arrived. They would surround him. They would eat from his hands. They would let him touch their sides and their necks. They were not broken things learned to live. They were not completely happy. The slow journey of, but they were learning that they could returning to hope. They were learning the first night at the sanctuary was not a night of celebration or happiness. Dr. Petra, it was a night of waiting at the end of worrying and fear. She told Victor that the donkeys were placed in separate warm stalls. Their infections because the veterinarian was not sure their bodies were starting to fill out. Their coats were becoming shinier. The one that Victor had frostbite on their ears and hose would leave with permanent marks. Her breathing became very shallow. Her eyes were on the path to recovery. The sanctuary staff Dr. Petra said something else that was equally unsure if she would ever. She said that their emotional recovery was veterinarian named Dr. Petra stayed awake all night. These donkeys had learned that the world was listening to her heartbeat and that humans giving her medicine to help her fight the infection. It would take a very long time to teach them that these things were not true. By morning, it would take consistent when the sun started to come up. The smallest it would take someone willing to visit them every single day. She was still alive. It would take someone who understood that saving a life does not end at rescue. In the next stall, it only begins there. Donkey had made Victor listened to these words. She was understood something that changed everything. Her legs were shaking. She understood that her body was still very needed him. But she understood that he needed them just as much as they needed him. The strongest of the 3, the one with the long white mane, they were survived the night with no problems. Their bodies were strong and healthy. She had drunk water that had been cleaned and shiny like they had been brushed by angels. Their eyes were bright, but she was stable. Dr. Petra examined all 3 donkeys on that first morning. They nickered. The examination took a long time. Children who came to visit the sanctuary would stand at the fence. She felt their sides to see how thin they were. The story of the 3 white donkeys had become in their lungs with a medical instrument. Local newspapers had written about them. When she was finished, a television station had made a video about Victor and Leo at the rescue. The good news was that all 3 came to the sanctuary just to see them. They were strong animals. The donkeys had become symbols. They had extraordinary strength hidden inside but something was missing. Victor knew bad news was much longer. He felt it every time he visited. Had severe frostbite on their ears. He felt it when he watched the 3 donkeys running together in the damaged by the cold. He felt it when they came to tissue would die and rested their heads on his shoulders. Their ears might not ever look normal again. Something inside him said that these donkeys would need many months to regenerate and grow new. Victor had never planned to keep the donkeys. All 3 had parasites. He had never thought this meant that small creatures living inside their bodies visiting them almost every single day, making them weaker. Something had changed. All 3 had infections from the cold. He had become their person. Poor conditions. They had become his purpose. They had pneumonia starting. He understood that if he left them, they had diseases in their digestive system. They would each of these problems they would be kill an animal that was they would not be happy in the way that they could be happy together if they were with him. They were very serious. They would not have what with every animal and care and warmth. They would not have one person who loved them completely. It was not guaranteed. They would not have a home that belonged for the next 2 weeks. So Victor made donkeys lived in their warm stalls. He went to the sanctuary director and received medicine. He asked if he could take the 3 donkeys that they had never known. He asked if he could take them to his small farm. Volunteers came at all hours of the day and night to check on them. The director looked at Victor's donkey was given special attention. She knew what this because she was still the weakest. She knew that Victor did not have much money. Twice every day caring for 3 donkeys and give her injections that would help her fight the infection. She knew that Victor would have to give up much of his own food that was soft and easy to digest. But she also knew something else. They were given water that these 3 donkeys they were given never find a home with more love. They were given heat lamps that Victor would give them. But so something unexpected happened. The day that Victor came to pick up the 3 donkeys did not get better in the way that everyone expected. The sanctuary staff had become attached to the animals. The infections were going away. Months caring for them. The food was making nursing them back to health, but their minds were still broken. They did not want to say goodbye. But they also understood when anyone came near them, best possible they still remembered the cold. They packed the trailer with food and blankets and supplies. When a sanctuary worker came to check on them, carefully they would back away. When someone tried to say goodbye, they would shake with fear. She hugged each of the donkeys. Would not eat. She told them that they were going home. She had learned that they were going to be loved in a way that she had learned that humans never get to be loved. Suffering. As Victor drove away from the sanctuary, almost every single day, Sarah stood at the gate. He brought fresh vegetables that he had bought with money he did not have. She knew that she was watching the special supplements that cost a lot of beginning of another. He brought time. Victor's farm was the most important thing he brought. It was small and simple. Each stall, there was a barn down on the floor. There were fields that had not been properly cared for. He would not try to make them do anything. There was one house where Victor lived alone and be present. Victor had never been there in a quiet voice. He had never had children. He would tell them stories. He had lived his whole life. He would tell them that they were safe, caring for stray animals, nobody lost creatures that nobody else. He would tell them that he understood that Victor led the 3 donkeys from the trailer into the field made sense, something because they had experienced terrible. The animals stopped. He would tell them that he was sorry about what had happened. Open space. He would tell them that he would never leave them alone without any signal from Victor. For 1 hour, without any encouragement. Then the smallest donkey began. He would come back the next day, then the second and do the same thing. Then the strongest one was the long. The donkeys wanted nothing to do with him. They had come home. It was not the sanctuary with its perfect fencing and the second one would stand as far away from the property where they had almost died. But the strongest one, it was home, the one with the long white mane. It was home because this was where they had been chosen and
She did
loved
not
without
hide.
any condition.
She just watched him.
Years passed.
One day,
The three
after
donkeys
Victor had
lived
been
on
visiting
Victor's
for 10
farm
days,
for 13 years.
something incredible happened.
13 years is
The
a
donkey
long
with the
time in a
long
donkey's
white
life.
mane walked over
It
to
is almost
Victor
their entire
and put her
life.
nose near his
During
face.
those 13
It
years,
was a small gesture.
something remarkable
It was not a
happened
big
that
thing,
nobody
but
expected.
it was the first time
Victor's
that any
farm
of the
became
three
famous.
donkeys had shown
Not
that they
famous
wanted
like a
contact
movie
with a
or a
human
television
being.
show.
Victor sat
But famous
completely
in a
still.
quieter,
He did not
deeper way.
move.
People
did not
from the
reach
region
out.
would come to
He just
visit.
let her smell his face and his hands. Then she did something that made Victor cry. She lowered her head and rested it on his shoulder. She was saying something without words. She was saying that she understood that he had saved her life. She was saying that she trusted him. She was saying that maybe, just maybe, humans were not all bad. Victor sat there with his head touching the donkey's head, and he cried like he had not cried in many years. Sarah, who was watching from outside the stall, also had tears in her eyes. This moment was not just important for the donkey. It was important for Victor. It was important for everyone who believed that life could be better, that suffering could be overcome, that trust could be rebuilt even after terrible betrayal. After this moment, things changed. The second donkey began to watch Victor the way that the first one did. She began to come closer. She began to eat while he was in the stall with her. This was a sign that she felt safe. This was a sign that she was starting to believe that the world was not completely dangerous. The smallest donkey took much longer. She was the most damaged. Her fear ran the deepest. But slowly, day by day, she also began to change. She began to eat. She began to stand closer to Victor. She began to look at him instead of looking away. By the end of the fourth week, all three donkeys would come to Victor when he arrived. They would surround him. They would eat from his hands. They would let him touch their sides and their necks. Children would come to learn about the donkeys. Schools would bring students to hear the story. Veterinarians and animal rescue workers would come to learn from Victor about what it meant to truly care for an animal. Documentary makers came. News people came. But Victor was not interested in being famous. He only cared about the three donkeys and making sure they were happy. He worked every single day on that farm. He cut grass for them to eat. He fixed the fencing. He cleaned the barn. He spent hours simply sitting with them, talking to them, being present with them. He never complained about the work. He never asked for help. He never asked for money or recognition. But other things happened that Victor did not expect. Sarah, who had discovered the donkeys in the first place, became inspired by what she saw. She started her own animal rescue organization. Today, that organization has saved hundreds of animals. Leo, who had helped with the rescue, opened his own animal sanctuary. Dr. Petra, the veterinarian who had treated them, began writing about emotional trauma in animals and how to heal it. Children who visited Victor's farm grew up and became veterinarians and animal scientists and rescue workers. The three donkeys had changed more than just their own lives. They had changed the lives of everyone around them. They had created a ripple effect of kindness and compassion that spread through the entire region like water spreading across dry ground. In the winter of the year that the smallest donkey was 16 years old, she became very sick. Her body was old. Her organs were tired. Victor sat with her for 7 days and nights. He did not leave her. He held her head. He told her that it was okay to let go. He told her that she had lived a good life. He told her that she had shown the world what was possible. On the 8th night, she closed her eyes and did not open them again. Victor buried her in a corner of the field where she had loved to eat grass. He built a simple monument from stone. On it, he carved her name, which was Bella. For the first time, anyone had given her a name. For the first time, anyone had said her name out loud. For the first time, her life had been honored and remembered. 1 year later, the second donkey died of old age. Victor buried her beside Bella. 3 years after that, the donkey with the long white mane, the one who had first touched her head to Victor's face, became very old. Her breathing became difficult. Her legs could no longer carry her. Victor sat in the barn with her on her final night. He held her head in his hands. He told her that she had saved his life as much as he had saved hers. He told her that without her, he would not have understood what love meant. He told her that he would carry her memory for the rest of his life. He told her that she had taught the world how to live. When she passed away, Victor was holding her. There were no tears. There was only peace. There was only the feeling of a life that had been fully lived, completely loved, and honored in every possible way. Today, Victor is old. His hands shake when he works. His back hurts more than it used to. But he still tends the farm. He still has other animals that need care. He still sits in the fields and tells people about the 3 white donkeys. He tells them that life is not about being perfect or being young or being strong. Life is about loving deeply and completely, even when it costs you everything, even when the world tells you that it does not matter. The 3 donkeys are gone, but their legacy is everywhere. In every person who chose to care for an animal instead of looking away. In every sanctuary that exists because people believe that suffering creatures deserve to be saved. In every child who learned that one person can change the world. The 3 white donkeys that almost froze to death in the snow did not just survive. They lived. And in their living, they taught everyone around them how to truly live.